Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. This is like a very exciting moment for me because we get to bridge today my passion for like public speaking as well as leadership. But before I get to all the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody a real quick introduction?
Yes. Well, Emma, thanks so much for having me. And my name is Eva Daniel, and I'm a public speaking coach. I help my clients work on both the content side of what they're going to say and then the delivery side of how they're going to say it. And I truly believe that public speaking is one of the best ways that you can grow your career, grow as a leader, and just it's also a lot of fun.
I think that there's some people that might disagree with us on that, but I love it. And I think it's a lot of fun as well. And we've had the chance to team up a number of times, both with my own speaking as well as joining us for stuff with our community. So I'm excited to share more of your wisdom with everybody through this conversation. So to get us started, I mentioned earlier that the idea here is to talk about the bridge between leadership and public speaking. So can you share a little bit with everybody about how you think we can use public speaking as a vehicle to grow within our own leadership journey?
Absolutely. Well, I believe that public speaking is going to be a part of your leadership for the most part, whether you like it or not. And what I have seen repeatedly happen to so many of the clients that I work with, suddenly their position of leadership, whether they're leading a small team or a big team or the owner of the company, they're expected to speak a lot, whether that's in front of their team, 5 to 10 people, whether it's pitching one-on-one to an investor, virtually, or whether it is to a large company update, or maybe you are starting to be asked to speak more regularly at industry events or at breakouts. And what happens is you're suddenly elevated to this position where you're expected to public speak a lot, but you've maybe never received any public speaking training, or you're reverting back to something you learned in high school or in college. So you're thrown into the deep end. You have to speak a lot and you're like, But I believe it truly is one of the ways that you can grow as a leader, because nothing else, in my opinion, can replace spoken communication. There's so many AI tools that we're all exploring. We even just recently on the Super Bowl saw so many ads for all of these different tools and all of these different things. And although those are amazing and they can assist us in different ways, there's even some exciting ones in the speech world. I don't believe that anything can truly replace you as your ability to communicate authentically with your team, to emotionally connect with them, and truly to connect with them on a deeper level, which as a leader, we know is so important in the way that you're showing up for your team and showing up for your company.
So one of the big tools that you talk a lot about in your content and you've helped coach me with in the past is the idea of how powerful storytelling can be as a component, whether you're on stage giving a keynote or communicating with your team and all of those like different avenues that you just mentioned. Can you share a little bit more about that idea?
Stories make our content stick. There have been so many studies done over the last 50, 60 years, from, taking test groups into rooms and seeing how many words they remember after a couple minutes, if they just are memorizing the list versus if they frame them in a story. But research consistently shows that we are more likely to remember content, 6 to 7 times more likely to remember content if we frame it within a story. So stories truly bring our content, our numbers, our data, anything that we're sharing to life. But when it comes to storytelling, a lot of us struggle. We start telling stories in a very linear fashion. A happened, then B happened, then C happened. We're giving people a list of linear facts rather than taking them with us into the moment. In fact, Emma, you mentioned that we've had the chance to work together before. And I love the story you shared with me about going on a stage to speak and a low chandelier that you were like hitting your head on. And so even stories like that, small stories, little snippets that we can start using in our communication, even if you might be in a position where maybe you're presenting a lot of numbers or a lot of data or a lot of marketing reports or, Q1 numbers to your team. I believe stories within themselves tell numbers, and we are all in a position where we can use storytelling a little bit more effectively, take people into the moment a little bit more with not just sharing those facts, but also considering, what were you feeling when that experience happened? What were you thinking? Or if you are, say, presenting data, what are you excited about? What are those numbers? What do those things tell us about things? So truly one of the best ways you can grow in your leadership, tell more stories to your team.
Well, and I want to dive into this idea of how do we use data to tell stories more effectively, because I think everybody's hearing that all decisions should be driven by data. And especially a lot of the folks that watch this show or listen to the podcast are in the software space. And if they're doing something like pitching to investors, all of that comes back down to data and numbers. So how can we infuse those aspects into our storytelling more effectively?
Absolutely. Well, a great story for any of us, whether that's a movie, a novel, a friend recapping their great engagement, whatever the scenario is, any great story is building up and leading to some level of a climax, some level of a catalyst moment for the person, the hero of the story that we're lobbying for. So let's say that you're in a position where you are regularly sharing data or numbers. Have you thought of your numbers and your data all building up to a climax or interesting moment? I can't tell you how many tech presentations I've heard over the years where it's just numbers, 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 slides, slides, slides. I don't even know necessarily what we're building up to, what the interesting thing is. So if nothing else, just looking at all of your content, all of the things you're planning on saying and going, okay, what am I building up to? What is the most exciting number that I'm revealing? How can I have that number pop more? Maybe that's from the delivery perspective. You're going to pause more around it. Maybe you're going to tell a little bit more of a story around it. Maybe you're going to deliver it with more enthusiasm. But even just looking at the order of your presentation, are you building up to something? What story have the numbers shared about how your company, if you're, say, giving those Q1 reports, how can you share in a way that builds up and leads your audience to a moment, an experience? And I always encourage people to read a book. If you are in a position where you're sharing a lot of numbers, there's a fantastic book called Making Numbers Count by Carla Starr. And this book highlights how can we share numbers in a more interesting way? How can we build up to the numbers? How can we create analogies or comparisons or tell stories with their numbers? So if you are in a position where you're regularly sharing numbers, read that book because it's incredible. But so a lot of times I think it is truly just figuring out, okay, what is that big number that I'm sharing? What am I excited about? As a presenter, when I'm looking at all of these things that I'm presenting, what fires me up? What should fire my audience up? Thinking through the audience, what's in it for them? Why should they care? Why should they care about the numbers you're going to share? Is it going to impact their personal raises or their promotions? Or is it going to impact what their department is able to do? Drawing that line between what the numbers are and how it impacts your audience is telling a story to your audience.
I love that idea of really focusing in on the why someone should care as a part of the storytelling surrounding the numbers, because I think sometimes we get so excited and caught up in like why we care about something that we forget to communicate that part to our audience and help them make the same connections that we're having in our brain. And I think specifically people that maybe are number heavy struggle with that idea of like pushing the why forward. So I love that piece of advice there to kind of end out our conversation.
Well, I was going to say, and even visually, on your, if you are using slides to present, not every presentation you give needs to have a slide deck. After all, not your slide deck is the presentation, and you need to be able to give it, even if you don't have any slides. Mm-hmm. Assuming though you are presenting a lot of numbers, you probably do have slides. So even visually thinking through, wow, is there a way that visually from a design perspective, I can do a red circle around the exciting number? Or if I'm, showing this graph that has lots of columns with lots of numbers, how can I highlight something differently or bold it or color it or make it pop for my audience so that they know what to absorb is the most important thing, especially if they're looking at hundreds of columns and hundreds of numbers throughout your, say, 60-minute presentation, or even if it's a shorter presentation, help them visually see what matters from your presentation and figure out a way to make it pop and make it come to life.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for the conversation. And if you're not already, make sure that you follow Eva on social media. She's got tons of really valuable content that she's putting out on a regular basis. And again, I've said we've worked together multiple times, so she comes highly regarded from me. So thank you very much for your time, everybody, for watching, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. If you like what you saw, be sure to come back on a weekly basis and subscribe for more expert interviews focused on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.